Hi, good morning, and welcome back to the Kristin Omdahl Show. This is episode 1157, and we're here live in Southwest Florida in my studio today. It is super windy outside, so if you hear some extra noises, that's what it is. If you're joining me live, please say hello. As you can see, we have a special little guest here with us today. Baby Bjorn has graced us with his presence. Haven't you, sweetheart? Poor baby got so scared last night. It cooled down significantly yesterday towards the evening, and just around sunset, like after the sun went down, but before it was pitch dark, I took him outside for a little while, and it was cold, so I ran in. We have a 25-foot leash, so I ran inside to put on a jacket, and I started hearing him howl outside. Something scared him so badly last night that he was too scared to even run in the door. He was howling out there. I brought him in. He howled in the corner for several minutes. I thought maybe he got attacked, bit or something, but he calmed down within several minutes, and he was fine after that. But man, that scared me, especially since his brother had gotten in trouble with animals too, Anyway, let's see who's here. Hi, Gail. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Judy, Sharon, Angela, Donna, Tammy, Trudy, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. How's your day going so far, sweetheart? You having a good day, huh? Yeah. Could have even been the wind that scared him. Who knows? Hi, Gail. Hi, Mariana. Hi, Val, and Donna and Judy. Good morning, everybody. Got lots to talk to you about today. Would love to hear your feedback on yesterday's crochet along video. And we have another live premiere video tutorial right after today's show. Let me grab that link for you right now so you can open it up in another browser if you want. So this will be at 10:30. And today we're going to be, yes, it was very scary for me too, Chris, especially since something like that is probably what got Becker in so much trouble a little over a year ago. So I do worry about what other kind of influences Bjorn can get into outside. But anyway, everything's good for right now. Hi, Carrie. Good morning. Hi, Judy. And today I'd like to talk to you about the Dahlia crochet motif pullover, which is what will be the video tutorial after the show today. Hi, Sylvestra and Edna. And I also wanted, if we have time, because we have a fixed amount of time now, got to be done by 10:30 in order to do the live premiere. I also wanted to talk to you about the, do a mini lesson on numbers and factors for figuring the factors of numbers for figuring out how to mix and match stitch patterns if you're going to do a sampler. And you don't necessarily need a pattern to do that if you have a stitch reference book that gives you the multiples, or there's access to all sorts of free stitch patterns on Pinterest and all over the internet as well. So when you know the multiple of a stitch pattern, you can figure out which ones work well within the same numbers so that you can mix and match them. For example, like this is going to be a little bit of a math reminder, but back in like elementary school, you would have learned about factors of a number. So the number 10 has several factors, numbers that can easily be divided into it. So 10 has a factor of 5, 2, and 1 because you can divide them easily, okay? So 10 divided by 5 is 2, 10 divided by 2 is 5. So if a stitch pattern has a multiple of 5 stitches and another stitch pattern has a multiple of 2 stitches, each one will work evenly in if your total stitch count is 10, let's say. And the higher the number, most of the time, more multiples or more factors of that number. So let me give you an example. I've started working on, I can't decide if it's going to be a class or a paid handout. Probably could be a class. So like in the class handout that I've been working on behind the scenes, like within a gauge of 3 stitches per inch, if you want your project size to be 24 inches by 72 inches, I give you what the factors are what the factors are of the number of stitches. So let me just say it out loud. So if you want to do a project that's 24 inches by 72 inches, you can do it in two ways, right? You can do it in lengthwise, where you cast on or do a beginning stitch count of 72 inches the long way and work up to 24 inches, or you can start with 24 inches and work up to 72. Either way, there's a number that is your stitch count, right? So if you're doing it lengthwise, and I told you this is based on 3 stitches to the inch. 3 stitches to the inch times 72 inches, you'd want to start with 216 stitches. Or if you wanted to do it this way, 3 stitches to the inch times 24 inches is 72 stitches. So your beginning would be 72 stitches, and you would work up for the number of rows or rounds to get the 72 inches. Based on that, so those two magic numbers here are whether or not you're going to do a beginning stitch count of 216 or 72. So from there, I wrote out all the factors of those numbers so that you can start browsing through stitch patterns and see which ones work out. So for example, the factors of 72 are 4, 6, actually there should be a 2 in there too, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 12, 18, 24, and 36. In fact, let me just add that in right now. Okay, so when you're looking at stitch patterns then, if a stitch pattern has a multiple of 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 12, 18, 24, or 36, it will work evenly within your stitch count. Does that make sense? And it might be a lot for hearing without seeing a visual, but I just wanted to bring this up loosely before explaining what I'm working on. Let's see. Oh, everybody's still saying hi. And I'm going to give you an actual example in a minute too. And then after we do this, I'll show you what I'm working on, why I'm doing this, and then we'll talk about the Dahlia crochet motif pullover, which will be the live premiere in just under 30 minutes. Wendy says it makes sense. Great. So as long as you know the factors of your stitch count, you can figure out which stitch patterns will work in it. Now, this gets a little more complicated when there's a plus, right? So most of the time in rows, it's that multiple +1 or +3 or +5 or plus whatever. And in rounds, oftentimes, most of the time, not all the time, there is no plus blank. Great, Steffi. I'm glad. That's amazing that you're not a mathy person and I explained it well enough for you to understand. Wonderful. Because this shouldn't be hard math. This should be something that you can figure out if you want to do stitch samplers. Personally, I love stitch samplers. I think they're so pretty. You may recall that I did 2 beautiful cardigans for Annie's a few months ago. In fact, let me pull up a link on my website so that you can see those patterns. I know it's on my blog. Give me 1 second. And like I said, there's some easy math to do this kind of stuff. And I'll explain why this is fresh in my head right now. So you know I've been working on a knit something. Haven't decided if it's going to be a vest or whatever it's going to be, a Ruana pullover. Anyway, I got really distracted last night or yesterday while I was working on this stitch pattern, and I noticed a pretty significant, a minor mistake that from a glance would be absolutely not noticeable, but in order to continue in the pattern, it would be more glaring than if I switched to a different stitch pattern. Does that make sense? So as you can see, let's see if I can you see where the mistake is? There's a little too much thickness here, like I missed a double decrease in this row here. And honestly, from here, now that especially since I switched stitch patterns right after the mistake, there's no way you're ever going to see that. There isn't. And I absolutely did not feel like unraveling back the mistake last night. Just being honest. I was just like, you know what? I don't have the heart. I don't have the energy. I don't have the resolve to do this. I guess I wasn't in a great motivated space, and I wanted to keep keep knitting, and I thought, you know what, this will be a fun stitch sampler. And honestly, anytime I can mix and match stitch patterns together and get an opportunity to talk about mixing stitch patterns together, it's a great lesson to teach other people. So I totally convinced myself to just make this a stitch sampler instead, even though I had lots of ideas of why this was going to be good with that original stitch pattern. So anyway, I can now explain to you how I figured out. So I had a stitch count of 101 stitches, and that worked out perfectly for my original stitch pattern, which had a multiple of 10 plus 1. And I wanted to figure out another stitch pattern for up here, and I'm going to probably do 3, 4, or 5 stitch patterns now, because once you do a multiple, I think it's fun to do, or once you do a sampler, I think it's fun to add more than 2 together anyway, unless you're going to stripe them and alternate them. So I was like, okay, so what else will work here without having to add or subtract? Because that is another option. If you have a large stitch count, it will be pretty insignificant if you have to add or subtract 1 or 2 stitches in order to get your multiples to work out easily. So like this stitch pattern that's up here is a stitch pattern that is a multiple of 6 plus 3. And I have used that stitch pattern as a multiple of stitch plus 3 many times. Well, when it came to do the math on this one, multiple of 6 plus 3 did not work out to be 101 stitches. But what I figured is that a multiple of 6 plus 5 did work out evenly for 101 stitches. So what I did was I tacked on a selvage stitch on each edge of the stitch pattern. So if the stitch pattern started with a knit 3, I made it a knit 4. If the stitch pattern ended with a knit 3, I made it a knit 4, or whatever. You know, all I needed to do was to fix the stitch pattern in order to make the stitch count work. Now, could I have decreased my stitch count down 2 stitches to make it work as well? Sure, I could have. But to me, at 101 stitches, I don't feel like I have the same wiggle room for gauge that I would if I had, say, 250 stitches on my needles. So, and I just like to push the envelope and do things a little differently sometimes, just to be able to have the conversation about it. Also, I wanted to point out, do you notice that it doesn't look ruffled like it did yesterday? I switched needles. I switched to a larger cord length on my circular knitting needles, and you see how much better you can see it now? Yesterday it looked like, well, it was shorter too, but yesterday it looked like this, and everybody thought that it was a ruffle, and that was because I had a much shorter set of circular knitting needles, and I was having trouble knitting also. I felt like I kept having to pull my stitches, which always scares me because you can break your needles when you have to pull on them too hard or make them fall apart. These are fixed. They're not the detachable kind, but still, the less pull and the less wear and tear you put on your needles, the longer they're going to last, obviously, just like anything else. So I'll show you that up close again. And so what I'm going to try to do, another thing that I like to consider when mixing and matching stitch patterns, is to make sure that the aesthetic isn't similar between them if I'm looking for high contrast. So notice how there is a much larger repeat on the lower one, and it's a much smaller repeat on the second one. I also like to offset column stitch patterns with offset stitch patterns. Does that make sense? You may recall in Crochet Power book, I have the chapters separated by that. There is a simple stitches chapter of stitch patterns, then there's a column stitch pattern, meaning the stitch patterns just work up in columns, and then the third chapter is offset patterns, where the motif of the pattern goes like this, it's offset. So I like to change the scale of the stitch pattern. I like there to be a difference in scale, and I also like there to be a difference in whether it's column or offset. I think it's just more interesting to the eye when you see significant differences between the stitch patterns. I also am separating them with a line of a little garter stitch. I do a 4-row garter stitch in between them. And if you want to see an example of when I've done this recently, I shared a link. Did I already share it? I can't remember now. That's not very good. Yeah, I shared a link to the patterns that I did for Annie's, and you can see in those photos and in those patterns, if you're interested in them, you can see how I alternated the patterns in the same aesthetic as I'm mentioning right now. Thanks, Trudy. Thanks, Sylvestra. The Hobie Mega Ball yarn is the nicest acrylic Trudy's ever worked with. Me too. I like it a lot. I really like it a lot. A lot of their yarns have multiple weights. I don't know if that one does. Probably. Michelle, a knitting newbie. Michelle, I would not waste your money on expensive tools when you're a new knitter. I think you could do just fine with a cheaper set to get started. Besides, I do like bamboo needles for beginners because they have a little texture to them and it slows down the yarn on your needles, which is a good thing as a beginner. You don't want something that's too slippery because then you run the risk of your stitches falling off. There is a set in my Amazon shop, or several sets in my Amazon shop, that are super affordable, and they are needles that I use often. Let me see if I can find one of the sets here. And you can get a whole set of all sizes with all sorts of lengths. This one here is 16-inch circulars, which are amazing for hats and small things. And then there's also a 31-inch set. There's several sets, but here's a link to one of them, and from there you can see the other lengths. And they're so affordable that I'd rather see you have full sets of things for a very small amount of money to get started and see if you even like it before you invest in hundreds of dollars on an interchangeable set. That's something that you do when you've decided that you really want to pursue something wholeheartedly. But when you're starting out, I think it's much better to get your feet wet and get some experience without having to invest a lot of money. And honestly, I enjoy working with these cheap needles often. I like the fact that I can afford a bunch of them, and so they can be on a project and I can still have extra needles to work with. Though one of the issues with interchangeables is that you can only do so many projects before you run out of cords and run out of tips, and it's just not the way I like to work. But there's something for everybody, and those of you that love interchangeables, no issues. You have no issues from me. I really like to encourage people to start with something affordable before they invest a lot of money. Besides, you don't know what you're going to like, right? You may be somebody that ends up liking pointy tip needles or dull needles or aluminum, metal, wood, all sorts of things. So I'd rather you get started and get familiar with stitches and stuff before you invest the money. And then try things out. Hi, Linda. All right, does anybody have any other questions? That was a great question. All right, so are we good on the gauge? There's a lot more I could say about sampling stitch patterns in gauge, and because I've written out so much of it already, is that something you'd like as a class? Is it something you'd like as a paid PDF download, kind of like a class handout but without the class? Or would you like it as a full class? Or do you not care about it at all? Or do you just like patterns that are already worked out with samplers to it? Hi, Chrissy, good morning. Bjorn, you're such an attentive student this morning. Look at you, sitting here listening to me. I'm so flattered. Hi, Donna. So flattered, baby Bjorn. All right. Next up, we're going to start talking about the Dahlia. What's this? A yarn ball band. There we go. We're going to talk about the Dahlia pattern. And so I pulled it up on my iPad so I could show you a whole bunch of stuff. Has anybody already downloaded this pattern? Has anybody started working on it yet? I would absolutely love to hear your feedback, because this pattern is written in a different way than a lot of patterns certainly a lot of the 900 plus patterns that I've written over my career. And it's very empowering. I feel like it's very empowering to me, and it's absolutely extremely empowering to you, the way I am able to write garment patterns when you make them in motifs. It's just a whole different world from when you're doing top-down increases, top-down increasing yokes, or even separates. Writing patterns in motifs allows me to be a lot looser terrible word to use when talking about knitting and crochet, I suppose, but a looser way of writing the pattern, because the sizing is based on how big you make those squares. That's it. Doesn't matter what weight yarn you use. It does not matter how many rows or rounds it takes you to get there. It doesn't matter what size yarn you use. If you want to make a bigger motif but want it to be the same number of rounds as a smaller motif, you make it in bigger yarn and bigger hook, right? And so the pattern is written in sizes 32, 36, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56, and 60-inch bust. 8 sizes. But wait, there's more because the garment size is determined by your blocked motif size. So I've written out how big your motifs need to be after blocking for each size. So I'll give you an example. For a 30-inch bust, a 32-inch bust size, your motifs need to be 5.75 inches wide by 5.75 inches tall, measuring 8 inches diagonally from corner to corner. And as long as your motifs measure that size, following this schematic, you will get the correct size. So this schematic is drawn in 2 ways. The one that's not in color is the front view, where you're seeing the neck hole opening, the 2 armhole openings, and the waistband. And the schematic below it is showing you the aerial view, just joining the motifs without closing them to make the sleeves and the waistband. Does that make sense? Because when joining the motifs together, this lower one is going to help you a lot to know where to put the triangles and where to put the squares, where to leave the square open for the neck hole opening. And if you wanted to make this a poncho and not a garment, this schematic would work very well for you as well. You would just skip the sleeve cuffs and the sewing assembly, and you would skip the waistband. Then the one above it explains which motifs, where your fold lines are, and where you join for the waistband and the cuffs. Okay, so those are both really important pieces here. But this is probably, and then of course we've got charts. So we're combining square motifs with the triangle half motif counterpart, both in the same stitch pattern. Those are both important, and they correlate with the written instructions for both. But there's even more important information in here, and that is the schematics of, let's see, I tried to zoom in on this, the schematics of the squares. So this tells you what size those motifs need to measure to make any size top. So let's say you don't even do a gauge swatch at first, right? Let's say you just dive right in and make a square. And you make your square, you fasten off, you block it, and then you measure it. And based on these measurements that correlate with the sizes that I listed at the beginning, you could make that motif, block it, and measure it, and then you're going to read the number. Let's say you're going to measure from corner to corner. Let's say you get 10 inches, okay? You get 10 inches and you're like, oh shoot, that's going to make a size 40. I need a size 44, okay? So you're like, I need it to be 11 inches from there to there. Or let's say you need to make a 48 and you need it to be 12 inches from there to there. Well, there's a couple of ways you can do it to adjust to make the right size. You can either redo it in a looser gauge with a larger hook, redo it with a larger yarn and a larger hook, or you could continue on in pattern also, because once you have your stitch pattern established, and so that last round on here is working 1 double crochet in each stitch around and working 3 double crochet, chain 3, 3 double crochet in each of the 4 corners. Just like in lots of other stitch patterns, you can continue on in your established pattern to make your motif larger as well. So not only are there 8 sizes included, not only can you make any of those sizes in any weight yarn, but if you are coming up short or too much or too little, too large or too small for the size you want to make, you can even adjust the motif by working less rounds or more rounds to get the size that you need. So like you can come at this from multiple angles as well. And because the last 2 rounds are worked that way. If your motif is too large, you can unravel the last round back. The joining is going to be the same way. And not only that, there are multiple joining options for this as well. I didn't want to limit anybody to doing something only one way because, and I'll show you that, you'll see that in the video. I also did this video in a different style than I've been doing videos for a while now. I've been, sometimes comments end up being the tail that wags the dog, right? You get enough people complaining that you don't do things one way, and so you start doing them that way, and then other people complain because you're not doing them the old way. Donna, would this pattern work with any colorway? Would this work with stash busting? I feel like you're asking, are there variegated yarns that may or may not work? A self-striping yarn will work fine, as you can see in the photos. Solid colors would be gorgeous, as you'll see in the tutorial video. I did solid colors there. Also, you could change color, right? I have done lots of other patterns where we do one color for round A, one color for round B, or one color for round 1, round 2. This is as written, it's a 6-round pattern. You could do 3 colors, 2 rounds each. You could do 6 colors, 1 round each of each 6 color. So stash busting that way would be great. I really don't think there's a bad color to use. And as far as variegated colors go, sometimes it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to feature the variegated color pattern, that's fine. It'll probably wash out the stitch pattern, but sometimes that's okay too. It depends on what your end goal is. So if a variegated yarn is super busy, like high contrast or short color changes, it will overpower. Oh, we're gonna run out of time, aren't we? It'll overpower the stitch pattern, but it's okay if that's what your goal is. So it's a great question, and we could certainly come back to that another time. But I hope this is a good enough setup for you to be enticed to come watch the video with me and maybe download the pattern. We're going to start the premiere in a couple minutes here, so I'm going to share that, share that link again. I shared it on the wrong page. We're going to share that link again, and if you have more questions about the pattern, hop on over to the live premiere with me right now, and you're more than welcome to ask me there. And we'll keep the party going. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you over there in a minute, and I'll see you next time here. Bye-bye.